U.S. now, where officials confirm that the self-proclaimed mastermind of the September 11th attacks and 4 other Guantanamo Bay detainees will be sent to New York to stand trial. The move is part of President Obama's efforts to close the prison, which he planned to do by January 22nd. Now, for more on this story, we go live to RT's Priya Shrita in Washington. So, Priya, the man who apparently confessed to being the mastermind of the 9/11 tragedy will be tried near Ground Zero. How's this gone down in the States?
Hey there. Well, you know, this is a very emotional issue for many Americans, and now questions are being raised as to whether these men can get a fair trial and how much of the information that was gained through those interrogation tactics should be used as evidence against them in court. And joining me to help discuss this is attorney Eric Montalvo, joining me here in the studio, and Gerald Posner, investigative journalist and contributor to the Daily Beast, is joining me from Miami. Thank you guys so much for joining me. So first of all, I'm going to ask Mr. Posner a question. I know that, 5 of these alleged masterminds behind the attacks of 9/11 will be tried in New York, but there was one man who was left off the list. Can you tell me a little bit more about him and why you think he was left off that list?
Yeah, I mean, the man left off the list is Abu Zubaydah, who was actually the top-ranking terrorist when he was picked up in March of 2002 by American forces in Pakistan. He's been waterboarded 83 times. The Americans did a fake flag operation on him after they caught him, in which they pretended they were actually Saudi interrogators, and they got him to disclose information that was critical about the Saudis and Pakistanis. And he was wounded, and they applied pain medication to him to take him on and off the medication to increase the pain so that he would talk. They aren't bringing him up to New York. He's not going to have a civil trial. It's not clear that any of the things that he disclosed could be admitted in court because of, quote, the enhanced interrogation techniques. And he's the one who I think is one of the most interesting, but the Americans are keeping him down in Guantanamo, and I'm asking why.
So, Mr. Montalvo, I know that you have defended Guantanamo detainees before, and as Mr. Posner just pointed out, this man had been interrogated with waterboarding techniques, but so was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. What's the difference, and should that evidence be used against those detainees in a court?
Well, as a general proposition, the answer is no. The evidence should not be used. The distinction, I think, at the end of the day is going to be that a lot of the activities of the 5 9/11 suspects occurred prior to them being in U.S. custody. So I think that there's a good body of evidence out there to document what their activities were and to base a prosecution off of. So I think at the end of the day, what the U.S. has determined is that they're going to be able to go ahead with that body of evidence because it wasn't obtained through the enhanced interrogation techniques. The other issue is that the techniques were used for intelligence gathering, I believe, to pursue information on further attack, not really focused on the criminal prosecution aspect. So I think that there are 2 separate issues. Now, in terms of the actual torture and them undergoing torture, we're going to have to consider how that may play out in terms of a mitigation issue and whether or not, the whole system is appropriate. So,
Mr. Posner, I want to turn back to you now. Do you think there's a distinction between the interrogation tactics that were used with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Abu Zubaydah? And if there wasn't, then could perhaps there be some sort of secret negotiations that went on between Abu Zubaydah and the United States?
No, I think that, it's absolutely right. What you just heard a moment ago is correct, which is that all of the enhanced interrogation techniques, as they're called, and whether you call them torture, or whether in fact it's waterboarding or fake flag operation or denying somebody pain medication when they're wounded with a bullet, all of the material from that is likely to be excluded and not used by prosecutors. They will have independent material, including, separate admissions and evidence of what these men had conspired to do. And if they had Abu Zubaydah on trial, they would tie him into the East African bombings in 1998, very, very likely, as well as the strike against U.S. ships that took place later. So there is a body of evidence of them in terrorism in general. There's a larger question, I think, which is there any chance at all that any of these defendants can get a fair trial in an American courtroom, especially in New York City, where I lived in 2001 when the attacks took place. I'm also an attorney, in addition to being a journalist. It's going to be very difficult to find an average New Yorker, especially one who was there in 2001, not very inflamed about this, it's going to be difficult to find one that will be able to sit there and not want to have some justice for that attack on America.
And, you know, I want to also ask you again about Abu Zubaydah. I know that you wrote an article about him in which you said that he could perhaps have had some connections to Saudi Arabia. Do you think that also could have played a role in him not being prosecuted in the United States?
No question about that. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I think is critical when it comes to Zubaydah is that he has given up information on 3 Saudi royals, all of whom ended up dead, one through a single car accident, one through what the Saudi royal court called dehydration at the age of 25, a Saudi prince, and one who was the nephew of the king of an infection when he had in the hospital after he went in for liposuction. The head of Pakistan's Air Force, Musharraf Ali Mir, also named by Zubaydah, died in a plane crash when his plane blew up, still being investigated by the Pakistanis nearly 7 years later. So that has nothing to do with the 9/11 attack in terms of what the American prosecution wants, but it does have a lot to do in terms of embarrassing American allies like Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. Those 2 countries clearly do not want that dirty laundry of what Zubaydah said out in the public. They don't want it in a federal court in New York City. And it's one of the reasons I personally believe that he will not be making the trip up to New York from Guantanamo.
And Mr. Montalvo, you know, Mr. Posner just raised an interesting point as a New Yorker that, you know, many New Yorkers are actually saying that they don't think that these 5 men could get a fair trial in New York City. What do you think about that? And do you think there's anywhere in the United States that these men could get a fair trial?
Well, I think that we need to pull back just real quick. You know, first of all, if Zubaydah does get adjudicated, the commission system sounds like it's going to kick back up. So he may get adjudicated down there, and all of the things that are, you know, being alluded to will be scrutinized in that system as well, and that'll become public. So whether or not information becomes public in either of these forms, I don't know is a true distinction. In terms of, you know, a fair trial, obviously this is a tough one. I believe that they have made their admissions to participation in the attacks known. They want people to know that they did this. So I think in terms of fairness, the issue is really going to be in terms of mitigation. What do we do with the idea that we've tortured them? You know, that's going to be the question. It's not really whether or not they can be properly convicted of what they have done. It's going to be more of, you know, how do we account for what we did to them in the process.
Well, there are certainly a lot of interesting issues that are being raised around this trial. I want to thank both of you guys for joining me. I'm sure all of America is going to be keeping a close eye on this, and we'll certainly keep you updated on it from here in Washington, D.C. But for now, it's back to you guys in Moscow.
I'm sure you will be doing a very good job of covering that for us. RT's Priya Shrita, thanks for joining us live in Washington.